Here we are. Good morning. We are on Kuf Dalid 104A1. Here we are. Okay. Boskin Melech. We have a Mishnah. Yeah, we have a Mishnah over here. So the Mishnah, we've been discussing the contrast between what is allowed to be done in the Beis HaMikdash versus what is allowed to be done outside the Beis HaMikdash. As we discussed throughout the past few days, that there was a special dispensation, things that are done for the avoda, for the service of the Beis HaMikdash in any way that are rabbinic, we are allowed to do in the place of the Beis HaMikdash, but that's a special dispensation only for the Beis HaMikdash. Says the Mishnah, Boskin melach lagabi kefesh b'shvil shlei achliku. Let's say it rains or it snows on Shabbos, and the ramp of the mizbeach, the ramp of the altar, which the Kohanim are walking on, is slippery, right? It's a ramp, and you imagine there's it's raining. You ever walk in the streets of Yerushalayim, even if you're wearing them like cleats, it's slippery, right? I mean, it's very slippery, right? So the point is, so what do you do to prevent people slipping? They poured salt. So the Mishnah says you're allowed to pour salt specifically in the Beis HaMikdash on the ramp so that the Kohanim do not slip from the rain. Okay, clearly you are not allowed to pour salt outside the Beis HaMikdash. Now we have to wonder, what about on Shabbos when you're pouring salt on top of ice? Is that going to be an issue? Can you do that? Can you not do that? We'll discuss that as well. Here they're talking about rain. We typically don't pour salt for rain, but we'll come back to the discussion about what to do for ice. Okay? It says in the Gemara further, person's allowed to draw water from a well known as the exile's well and the well known as the great well with a windlass on Shabbos. I had to look up what a windlass is because I have no idea what a windlass is. A windlass, anyone know? Okay. A windlass, for those of you who boat, is a big contraption which is used to pull up of the anchor. Okay, so nowadays they're electric, but basically it's a thing where it basically it pulls a rope, pulls like a heavy rope. So they had a mechanical one. If they wanted to pull a significant amount of water on Shabbos, you would, right? So they have these on every ship. They have a windlass, which is basically the thing which turns and pulls a rope. So they are allowed to pull water from these wells, and they basically use this big contraption to pull big buckets of water. Okay, you're only allowed to use this windlass on Shabbos for these wells. Okay, but not obviously only in the Beis HaMikdash area, not outside. Umi be'er hakir b'yom tov, and from the hakir well on Yom Tov, but not on Shabbos. The be'er hakir is a well that is not in the Beis HaMikdash area. Okay, it's outside the Beis HaMikdash area, and we'll discuss all these in terms of why salt can't be done on Shabbos. Now, what is it about pouring salt, and what is it about using a windlass that cannot be done out to the Beis HaMikdash? We haven't really defined that yet. We've said these things could only be done in the Beis HaMikdash area. They can't be done elsewhere. Which malacha are we talking about over here? Or even rabbinic malacha that it was only allowed in the Beis HaMikdash area and not allowed elsewhere? We will discuss. Good? Yeah.
Using the water for this is for part of the Kohen's washing process.
Presumably it's going to be used for something to do with the Beis HaMikdash. Whether it's washing the animals. They need a decent amount of water in the Beis HaMikdash vicinity. Okay, for things which relate to the avoda. Okay, so first we have a contradiction. So it says the Gemara, Rami le Rav Ika mi Pashronia le Rava. Rav Ika from Pashronia asked a question to Rava, a contradiction from a Mishnah and a Brisa. It's not. We have in our Mishnah, it says you're allowed to pour salt on the ramp so that the Kohanim don't slip. But Mikdashin, Medina lo, saying that clearly you're allowed to do this in the Beis HaMikdash, but not in outside the Beis HaMikdash. That's what our Mishnah is teaching us. Or minhu, but we have a brisa which says, if the floor of a courtyard was ruined by rainwater, okay, so it's all, there's rainwater ruined over here, meaning it's slippery, it's muddy, so maybe teven umuradaba, you're allowed to bring straw and spread it out on the ground. So this says you're allowed to do this, and this is talking about a courtyard. This is talking about in your own personal space. So on the one hand, in the Mishnah it says you're only allowed to pour salt in the Beis HaMikdash, right? Not outside. And then in the Brisa, it says you're allowed to pour straw even outside the Beis HaMikdash. So it would seem to be straw, salt. What's the difference? Gemara says, no, of course there's a difference. Shani tevin lo mevatale. Straw is different because the person who pours straw doesn't intend to leave it there forever, whereas salt, a person plans on leaving it there forever. So what's going on over here? So what's the issue with salt? So the issue with salt is that it is a rabbinic form of bona, of building on Shabbos. In other words, since I plan on leaving it on the ground, and it's on the ground, it therefore becomes a part of the ground. I'm putting something there, and it's going to remain there, and therefore essentially I'm adding to the structure. Now it's not biblical building, because you don't build houses with salt, but it's a form of rabbinic building, and therefore to pour salt directly on the ground is seen as something which is being done it's a form of building, and therefore it's only allowed in the Beis HaMikdash, not outside the Beis HaMikdash. Straw, which is something that they would reuse. They put the straw out because it's rainy, but then after that they pick up the straw and they feed it to their animal because that's what you did back in the day. They recycled a lot more than we do. And therefore that would be permitted outside the Beis HaMikdash because you're not leaving it there. But something you're going to leave there becomes a part of the structure and therefore is rabbinically prohibited. Yeah? Now, let's... Sorry?
The salt absorbs.
The salt absorbs, and therefore it's called building.
But it's not changing.
It's not biblical building. Again, you didn't put down cement and wood, but the point is, since you're leaving it there, it offends. Yeah, you're right. You're doing some form of building. You're adding in some form of structure. Now, pouring salt on ice on Shabbos, according to most poskim, is allowed because there it's getting absorbed by the ice, not the ground, and therefore, according to most poskim, you are allowed on Shabbos. There's other issues of molid of that in general we're not supposed to take ice and like crush ice on Shabbos and make it into water. The ice melts. It's one thing, but you're not supposed to be crushing ice on Shabbos. You don't like make slushies with ice. You don't like crush ice on Shabbos. But over here, since the ice is being melted in an indirect fashion, you would be allowed, according to most poskim, if it's slippery outside, you can go ahead and pour salt everywhere, and therefore you're not putting it directly on the ground. You're putting it on the ice. It's true, some pieces are going to fall on the ground. And that's not included in this prohibition. So for us, practically speaking, you are allowed to pour ice on. You're allowed to pour salt on ice, pouring salt on the ground, even if it's being done. So there's some discussion about pouring salt preventive, in a preventative fashion, right? Sometimes a person, well, I know it's going to snow tomorrow. No. Let's say it happens Friday night. Let's say it's Friday night. You're doing it on Shabbos for Sunday. But let's say it's Shabbos morning, whatever it is. Okay, fine. Longer discussion, but even there is potentially allowance. You're not doing it for the sake of putting it on the ground. You're doing it for the ice that's going to fall on it. Fine. Bottom line, it's certainly allowed. If you wake up Shabbos morning and your walkway is icy, you are certainly allowed to go ahead and sprinkle salt on it. Okay? If you want to pour salt before a storm, better do before Shabbos. Whatever. Fine. Okay, let's go further. Okay. Amrale Rav Achaber Rav Rashi. Hi Melech Dami. What's the story of this salt? Idem avatlein kamosiv habinyan. If the person scatters it, intends to leave it there, then they are adding on the construction of the Beis Hamikdash, of the Mishkan. Uchsiv, the pasuk says, "Hakol b'chsav miyad Hashem alai hiskil." Pasuk says it's all in writing. Okay, basically pasuk saying that that everything that we have in the Beis Hamikdash is exactly as it was taught by Hashem, and we're not allowed to add to it. Over here, we're no longer asking a question about Shabbos. We're asking a more general question. We are not allowed to go ahead on it's in the Beis Hamikdash and add to the structure of the Beis Hamikdash. Everything has to be sanctioned by God. So the Mishkan has the Beis Hamikdash is a very particular building, blueprint. And if I go ahead and I'm going to add to it by putting salt there, I'm adding to the structure of the Beis Hamikdash, right? So he says, on the one hand, if I plan on leaving it there, then I'm adding on to the building. And therefore, again, forget Shabbos for a second. I'm in violation of adding on to the structure of the Mishkan, which Beis Hamikdash can't do. And if a person does not intend to abandon the salt there, in other words, they're going to pour salt because it's raining, and then afterwards they're going to sweep it up, then a kavi chatzitza. It's an interposition. It is a chatzitza. It's a blockage between the kohen and the avoda that he's doing. Right? We spoke in the past few days. A kohen's not allowed to wear gloves on doing the avoda. Why? Because there can't be something which blocks the actual body from the avoda. So over here, if I'm pouring salt and I plan on leaving the salt there, then I just add it to the structure of the Mishkan, Beis Hamikdash, and I can't do that. If I plan on removing it, then that means it's not really a permanent thing there. It's not part of it, and therefore it's like I went ahead and I put like carpeting on the floor of the Beis Hamikdash, which I can't do because that is like wearing gloves when I do the avoda. Yeah? With me on the question? Yeah? So it says the Gemara, 104.82, Beholacha sevarim lekevesh tulav avoda his. The Gemara says no. Well, the ramp where a person's walking up the ramp, that's not part of the avoda. In other words, the part of the avoda is the is the stuff that's the stuff that you put on the mizbeach, top of the mizbeach itself. But the walking process, that's not part of the avoda, right? It's true, it's in the Beis Hamikdash. Right? So the Gemara at this point is saying, really, we're going to remove it. We're not going to keep it there, right? And therefore, it's not a matter of adding to the structure. To your question of it's a chatzitza, the Gemara says not a chatzitza, because it's like, if I go ahead and I put a little mat on the floor of the Beis Hamikdash, and I plan on removing it, that's not a chatzitza, because there's no avoda simply walking in the Beis Hamikdash. The avoda is when I sprinkle the blood. The avoda is when I actually put the food on the animal fats or the whatever on the mizbech. But walking up the ramp, that's not part of the avoda, and therefore there's no issue of chatzitza in that moment. That's the Gemara wants to answer at this point.
It's back at the discussion we had yesterday, the day before.
With the left hand, or
well, I was going to say, with just with preparations on the actual.
Correct. Exactly. Says the Gemara. Right, excellent. Right. Sorry. What do you mean? Well, we saw good, but we saw that when it comes to allowing it, there's two things. We waive deoraisas, we waive biblical prohibitions if it is directly connected to the avoda. But in the Makom Mikdash, we said anything that in any way relates the Beis Hamikdash to the avoda, even if it's not directly related. So, for example, we had an example where a cabinet broke. Now, the cabinet was something which stored spices or whatever it is. That's not a direct part of the voda. It's a preliminary element, and we still allowed it, right? So this would be similar to that. It's a preliminary element, and therefore that's going to be allowed as long as it's rabbinically prohibited, okay? So says the Gemara, Velo, is that not part of the priestly service? Vaksiv, isn't it say, Vikriv HaKohen Esakol, Viktir Mizbecha. The Kohen shall bring it and burn it on the altar. So what does this supposed to mean? Kohen shall bring it. Zohalacha Zevarim Lakevish. This refers to taking the limbs up the ramp. So clearly going up the ramp is part of the avoda. Don't tell me it's a preliminary part. It's not really a main part. It is still avoda. So the Gemara says, rather, we're talking about scattering salt for the procedure of taking wood up the ramp, that's really preliminary. When you're putting the wood there, meaning there's a fire there, you're putting wood to make it a bigger fire, that's not avoda. That is preliminary, and therefore, for that part, so what's coming out is a kind of a strange thing. But the Mishnah said you're allowed to pour salt out. What it's talking about is that you're only allowed to pour the salt when they're carrying the wood up the ramp. Okay, so basically it's the beginning of the day and it rains and they have they want to increase the fire or start the fire. So to carry the wood up, which is not part of the vote at all, but it is, to your point, it's on the base. It's part of it's obviously relates to the avoda, but it's not ikr part of the avoda. They're allowed to pour salt out because we're not worried about chatzitza in that context. Okay,
You have to remove it before you.
and then they go ahead and remove it, right? And then they go ahead and remove it, and then you go ahead and go up the ramp carrying the fats.
There's no rabbinic prohibition anyway because you're removing it. You're not making
Excellent question. Very good. So good. The Achronim asked to say, wait a second, what was the whole prohibition to begin with? The prohibition was because you're going to leave it there. But Ross is asking, wait a second, if this would be true, if I go ahead and pour salt in my front yard and then I go ahead and remove it 5 minutes later, it wouldn't be. That also would be. It should be allowed in outside the basement. So the Achronim answer. No. The reason is because that since typically it's left, right? So outside the base of Mikdash, who in the world does that? It's bizarre. So you say, I'm going to do it. Too bad. We have a general prohibition against putting down salt. Excellent, right? But when it comes to the base of Mikdash, there we say you can pour it and remove it. Yeah. Okay. Fine. Says the Gemara further. Darash Rava expounded. If you have a courtyard which was ruined by rainwater, maybe teven umaradaba, you're allowed to bring straw and spread it out. Okay, on the grounds. Okay, so we saw the statements earlier that again, if there is if the courtyard is ruined by rainwater, you could bring straw and spread it out on the grounds. Amalei Papa Rava Vatanya. Didn't the Brisa say Shumarada in Marada lo besav lo bekupa lo b'shulei kupa? When a person spreads out straw, it has to be done in an abnormal fashion. You can't just normally when you have straw, straw's in a box, straw's in a basket, and you take the straw and you start like shaking it out. But the Brisa then says that you can't do it in normal fashion. You have to basically take like a broken box. Okay, so imagine just like the bottom of the box. In other words, it's missing its walls, and then you go and you carry the box kind of like, and you kind of shake the board around. But you can't go ahead and pour it normally. Whereas Rava just said you're allowed to pour normally. So Hadar Okim Rava Amora Alevidarash. Rava pointed the speaker on the matter and expounded. Sometimes what the teachers would do is it wasn't enough. They wanted to make sure something was known. They wouldn't just teach it themselves. They would get like the person with the loud voice to go ahead and and say, okay, I want you to go teach this to everyone. And they would go and expound it and teach it. And he had his speaker say the following: Dvarim Shemart Lefrechem. That I said to you before. Taosei biyadi. It was a mistake. I have a theory, again, I can't say this definitively because I just don't know, but I have a theory, and I think what you mentioned before, that Eruvin has the most times, that I personally recall, the most times that you'll find Amoraim saying, I made a mistake, over and over again. You have people saying there was a mistake, and I think it's just a fascinating thing, especially in the Masechta, which is really the rabbinic Masechta, all about Eruvin. You have the rabbis also acknowledging their fallibility and recognizing that they're not perfect. Okay, fascinating. Okay, to me.
But he had somebody else say it.
No. He said it because he wanted, it's
Proclaim
Yeah. It's like social media of the day. You get like a guy. It's like I couldn't say do it on your own, so you have like the guy. Okay, Tosei Miyadi. But it was everyone knew it was from him. Everyone knew it was from Rava. He wasn't trying to avoid it. On the contrary, he's trying to amplify it. Right. It says Tosei Miyadi. That I said before it was a mistake. Baram in truth. So he said what I told you before was a mistake. Don't listen to me. Tosei Miyadi. Baram Kacham Rishum Rabbi Eliezer. What they said. The truth is what you should do. What it said in the name of Rabbi Eliezer. When you spread the straw, in Marada lo b'sav lo b'kupa lo b'shulei kupa, you should spread it out from a basket or box, but only from the base. The remains from broken box has to be done again in an abnormal fashion. Okay, says the Gemara further. Mimalin bar hagola. The Mishnah told us you're allowed to draw water from the exile's well. Ula, fine. Now, as we'll see, the wind. What's it called again? Windfall. Wind glass, thank you, is very noisy. It's very noisy. It's a noisy contraption, okay? And we'll see that's going to relate to our upcoming discussion. Ula ikla vera Menashe. Ula went to the home of Menashe on Shabbos. Asu gavra tarfa baba. And they're sitting in the house. Ula and Menashe, they're talking. And all of a sudden, there's a knock on the door. Okay, so Amar Mai Hai. Man Hai. Ula turns to Rav Kahana. He says, "Who is this person? Litachla gufe to come machel l'shabsa. Let his body be desecrated because he desecrated Shabbos." Okay, strong words. He says this person just desecrated Shabbos. He knocked on the door. He made noise. Okay, so Ula is clearly of the opinion that that any noise whatsoever is not allowed to be made on Shabbos, even if it's not musical. But knocking on the door would be prohibited on Shabbos. Right? And so comes along Rava, Rabba, lo asr ela kol shel shir. Rabba argues with Ula and says, no, what's not allowed, you're allowed to make sounds on Shabbos. What you cannot do is make musical sounds on Shabbos.
How does Ula walk?
Sorry?
How does Ula walk?
How much noise do you make? No, I don't know, it's soft, no?
Bare feet.
No, first of all, that would be a davar shemiskav.
Yeah,
Bare
you
feet.
know what's happening.
No, I was saying specific ratio. Okay, but still, it's rabbinic. I'm not sure. I mean, right? That's rabbinic. Over here, there's a big distinction between. It's certainly rabbinic, no question about it's rabbinic, right? It's a prohibition based on the fact that I might go ahead, fix instruments, etc., etc. But what's it called? But when it comes to walking, it would be a davar miskavein and a rabbinic and lo nichale. You don't care about it. It'd be very different, right? But as opposed to knocking, you are deliberately making a noise. Okay, so. Well, I also jumped to the conclusion. I mean, you're working backwards over here. I told you the final halacha. So let's go back. Let's get back to the whole discussion about this whole discussion, because yes, whistling would be part of this discussion. So the Gemara is going to now discuss this question about, can you make noise? The prohibition against making noise on Shabbos, is it any type of noise, or is it specific to musical related noises? That's going to be the discussion going further. So Esvei Abaya asks Rabba. Rabba was the one who said you're allowed to knock on a door, right? He said any, because it's not a musical noise. So Abaya challenged Rabba from the following brisa: Malin bidiofi. You're allowed to siphon wine from one barrel to another with a double tube. Okay, basically I had these tubes which were like two straws basically attached to one another, and you'd have two barrels of wine. You want to move the wine from one place to another, but I don't know, like I guess they're too heavy to pour. So what they would do is they would breathe in from one straw, that's attached. It's a long straw that's attached from one barrel to another. You go like this a little bit, and it starts drawing the wine, and the wine continues through the force of, I don't know, gravity. I don't know, whatever it is, something. Fine, you're allowed to do that on Shabbos. You're allowed to use water drip from an arak for a sick person on Shabbos. So what's an arak? It's not the drink. Arak is basically this barrel that had these tiny little perforations on the bottom, okay, and it had a small plug on the top. And so as long as the plug was in, the holes were too small on the bottom, then no water would come out. You pull the plug, air comes in, and it actually starts pushing then it allows the water to start falling through the small thing, and there's like a metal plate underneath. And to make this it's almost like, you know what it was? It's basically, it's kind of like, it was a noise machine. It was a primitive noise machine. Okay, it's a pretty cool one, right? And basically, it would just make like these soft little like pitter patter like we hear on the rooftop over here. It's basically a noise machine. So he says, the Mishnah says, the Brisa says, lechola in levari lo. You're allowed to do it for a sick person, but not a healthy person. So what do you see? You see hechidam. So what do you see? Basically, we're making noise over here, right? You're making noise. So hechidam, right? So what comes out of this brisa is that it's only allowed for a sick person, but not a healthy person, which means you're not allowed to make noise on Shabbos. And that's not. So the Gemara at this point is assuming we're not talking about being done in a musical fashion, right? They're not. It's not an instrument. So the Gemara says, hechidami. What are we talking about? Lav danim dinim v'kam dilitar. What we're doing over here is actually, well, I kind of went backwards, but the Gemara is assuming we're talking about someone who's sleeping, and you're trying to wake him up in a soft way, right? So you're trying to wake up the sick person in a soft way, and therefore, what comes out? This is basically, and to wake them up, you're just basically just like, I don't know how you wake up your kids, but eventually, sometimes, I don't know, you just like, make some noise. So basically, you're just trying to make some noise, and it's still only allowed for a sick person, not a healthy person. You see, just making noise is not allowed for a healthy person. So it says, Asir. We see from here that production of sound, even in a non-musical fashion, is forbidden. So when it says lo detir v'kabai delanim, it's the opposite. It's a sleeping machine, like I said before. The person's awake and you're trying to fall asleep. What you're trying to do is make like bell sound. You're trying to make like a soft, soothing sound that is more rhythmic, and therefore that's why it's going to be forbidden. And non-rhythmic sound is going to be allowed. Okay, so the Gemara tries to ask from somewhere else. 104a3. We ask from the following brisa. Hamashamer perozim neha ofos. Person guards his fruit from birds. Udalam nechaya, or guards from wild animals. Mashamer kidak b'Shabbos. You can watch them regularly on Shabbos. You could stand outside and prevent animals from being there. Uvilvad shelo yisapek. You can't clap your hands. Lo yitapach. You can't beat your chest. V'lo yiraki k'der shenos michol. You can't stamp your feet like you do in the week. My time and lav to kamol v'chol elude kala aser isn't because you're making sounds, and even though it's not musical, you're not making musical sounds for the birds. You're just trying to scare them away. You're going like this, right? It's not like a rhythm. You're just trying to scare them away. So you see, it's aser. Gemara says no. There, it's aser not because of the fact you're making noise. It's because you're outside and you're trying to scare animals, and you start doing all these things. You might go ahead and do the next step, which they often do, which is pick up a rock and throw it at the animal, and then you'll be moving something in the public domain for amos. That's why it's not allowed. But if you were in your home and you wanted to go ahead and just stomp your feet, that would be okay. Okay, Va'ela Hadam Rav Yehuda Marav Nashim Masachos Begozim Aser. The Gemara, Rav Yehuda says in the name of Rav that women cannot play with nuts on Shabbos. This was a common game. So not a lot in Israel. I don't know. In any poor countries, they play with nuts, right? This is what they do. They don't have toys. They play with like the shells. So it can't be done on Shabbos. My time Alamid Kamoli Kala V'Chalolude Kala Aser. Isn't it forbidden because you're making noise, right? They hit each other and it's making any noise. Though the Gemara says no. Dilma Asi Lashvi Gumas. The reason you can't do it is because the way to play, you need to make sure the land is flat, right? Because it was a bump, and that's why my walnut, whatever it is, didn't do the right thing. So the problem is, I might go ahead and make the ground flat, which is aser on Shabbos. So Gemara says, "Ilo tema hachim," will prove it because you have to say this. Hadam Rav Yehuda nashim misakus betapuchos aser. It says that women are also allowed to play with apples. It seems like the women play; it's not the men. But you're not allowed to play with apples. And hasam mayu lidikala ika. There's no noise with apples, right? With nuts, you have noises. So the issue is only because of flattening out the indentations and not because of noise. Okay, one more challenge from our Mishnah. Tnan, it was learned in the Mishnah. You're allowed to draw from the well with these windlasses, but only in the space of the base of Mikdash and not elsewhere. So my time, why are you not allowed to use it? Meaning, what's the whole prohibition of the windlass? Isn't because the windlass makes noise. It's a noisy contraption, and therefore you see that outside the base of Mikdash, you can't make any noise, even if it's not a rhythmic noise. The says, no, the reason it can't be done with a windlass is because it pulls a lot of water, and therefore there's a concern that a person may draw water and go ahead and water their garden. It's not because of the noise, it's because of what you may do with the water, and therefore in the place of the base of Mikdash, it's rabbinic and therefore allowed. And you're allowed to draw the water and use it for the animals or whatever you're using the water for. But outside the base of Mikdash, you can't do it because the concern you may use it for something which is otherwise usher to do on Shabbos. A Maimar permitted drawing water with a windlass in the town of Mechuzah. Amar, he said, my time ago Rabbanan, what's the reason the rabbis decreed against using a windlass? Because the person may use the water to water their garden or to water their plants. In a ruin, people didn't have gardens. It was like Brooklyn. Okay, so basically there's no grass. And basically he said, if there's no grass, then it shouldn't be an issue. I should be allowed to draw water. So where it says no. However, came into 104b1, Tarabe Kitana. He saw that people were drawing water and soaking flax in water during the week. Aslahu, he therefore says, wow, people are using a big amount of water for a forbidden purpose with something which would be forbidden to use on Shabbos. And therefore he said, you can't use a windlass, you can't draw significant water on Shabbos. You would be allowed to use like a little bucket. If you were somewhere where there's an Eruvin, there's a little bucket, and that's the way you could draw water, that would be allowed. But we're talking about using these a very large thing, that can't be done on Shabbos. Okay, with Berakar, the Mishnah said that you are allowed to draw from the Hakir. So bottom line, the Gemara leaves this unresolved. Let's do halach l'maisa, practically speaking. So like this, we spoke about this before. Clapping on rhythm, there are many who say, based on these Gemaras, it's completely asur. It's completely asur to clap along whether you're singing, it's completely asur. There are those who allow it specifically in the context of davening or zmiros, which is a bit of a chiddush, but that is an accepted view, that you are allowed to do so for the sake of, for zmir, again, for like a holy purpose would be allowed. So again, basically, again, in shul, for whatever. But even those who forbid it, it's worth noting that when people clap for, what comes out is we do paskin like Rabbah, who says a non-musical clapping is allowed. And therefore, if you go to someone's door, we don't paskin gula. So if you go to someone's door on Shabbos, you are allowed to go ahead and knock on the door. That's totally fine. Similarly, which is a little bit of, I believe, amaratos, or maybe a stringency, I shouldn't say that, but basically, if you are clapping for applause, that's not rhythmic clapping, right? So even those who take the more, I would say, more easier opinion, meaning those of us who clap while we daven, that's a leniency. I want to be clear. We're not being, the other people aren't being strict. We're being lenient, okay? So the more normative is that you shouldn't be, clapping, clapping for. Yeah, but applause. Yeah, so everyone agrees you can do it with the shinoi. Okay, so meaning those who take the more normative view say if you go ahead and do it with the shinoi, then it's certainly up. If you go like this and you're clapping along to music, that would be totally fine.
How about when you go like this?
That's why some people do that, right? So again, just to quickly review. Sorry?
What is changing the way
Chaining is just, it's not because it doesn't make it melodious, it's just that it makes it, once you do a shinoi, it takes it out of, there's a general rule that, if it's already rabbinic and, if you do it abnormally, then it's not part of the rabbinic prohibition. Okay, but one thing it's worth noting is that when it comes to applause, you're just clapping, giving someone a standing ovation, you're just clapping along, that there's no problem, right? So for people to go like this, that's a massive stringency. In other words, the whole thing is a rhythm. We don't paskin like Rabba or like Ula. We paskin like Rabba, and therefore, again, to do with music, to do it on rhythm, there's real reason to not do it. It's a dispensation specifically when it comes to holy singing, but when it comes to just clapping for someone, there we don't paskin like Ula. We paskin like Rabba. The same way you're allowed to knock on a door on Shabbos, you're also allowed to just clap on Shabbos because it's non-rhythmic. We'll continue, God willing, tomorrow. Have a great day.